All and welcome to the Gwent Police and Crime Panel meeting. I'd like to thank you all for attending today, and we are now live and about to commence the meeting. If we could do introductions first, so we'll start to my left. So Jill Howells, chair of the panel.
Colin Mann, Caerphilly County Borough.
Peter Nuttall, Co-opted.
Councillor Jonathan Miller, Blaenau Gwent.
Councillor Lisa Winnett, Blaenau Gwent.
Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Sean Curley, Commissioner's Chief Executive.
Darren Goward, past Commissioner's Chief Finance Officer.
Councillor Tony Easton, Monmouth County Council.
Councillor Jez Kirby, Caerphilly.
Councillor Jason Jordan, Newport City Council.
Councillor Mark Spencer, Newport City Council.
Councillor Emma Rapier, Torvine County Borough Council.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah, Torvine Borough Council.
Roger Guest, Commissioner's Head of Communications and Engagement.
Joanna Robinson, Head of Strategy Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Joanne Regan, Head of Assurance and Compliance for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Catherine Forbes-Thompson, Lead Officer to the Police and Crime Panel.
Charlotte Evans for Caerphilly County Borough Council.
Thank you all very much. First item on the agenda this morning, declarations of interest. Any to add?
As was recorded.
No additions. Thank you very much. Apologies for absence.
Larry Thomas, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Chair, we've also got Councillor Peter Clark, Councillor Christine Forehead and Councillor William Ropley.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to agenda item number 3, the minutes, the Gwent Police and Crime Panel held on the 12th of August 2019. If we take accuracy of matters arising at the same time, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, no issues or matters arising. Can I have someone to move the adoption of the minutes, please? Thank you. And a seconder. Thank you very much.
All in favour.
All in favour? Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 4, the Police and Crime Commissioner's update. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chair. This, of course, has been provided to you in writing. There are nevertheless some matters that I would like to highlight before I pause for questions that there may be on it. While I don't intend to go through each and every item in this report, I do want to highlight some key achievements and also to take the opportunity to inform you of some good performance by Gwent Police in Q1. Now, as agreed, at the last panel meeting in August, the performance update for today's meeting is for information only, which is item 8, in relation to the development of the performance report, performance framework and report. There is a performance subgroup meeting straight after this meeting to go through this. My thanks again to the force, my office and the panel performance subgroup for their ongoing work to help refine reporting processes. Now, as agreed, there is no report for Q1 performance. However, given the improvements made in the last 6 months as to how the force reports on its performance, and this is set to improve in the future, I feel it is important to take this opportunity to highlight some good performance by Gwent Police in Q1. Now, under crime prevention, the Women's Pathfinder Diversion Scheme has been recently re-tendered, with the services due to launch in the coming weeks. The Early Intervention Youth Serious Violence Prevention Project and Newport Serious Organised Crime Project, meanwhile, are both helping to forward our narrative of prevention and intervention, breaking down barriers in some hard-to-reach areas. A large amount of the increase in violence without injury relates to harassment recording. The Home Office, we're informed, is likely to change the counting rules in this area, and as a result, we would expect crimes to show a decreasing trend in future. This could also affect the reported number of domestic abuse-related crimes, as the harassment and malicious communications crimes are most often crimes of this nature. I'm pleased to say that domestic abuse supervision, investigation and safeguarding has improved significantly over the year. It was recognised that there were improvements to be made by the force and the Inspectorate. I am satisfied, as are the Inspectorate, that the recommendations and areas for improvement have been addressed. However, as this involves so many victims and indirect victims and causes such harm, it will always be an area of concern, particularly scrutiny and for development. In terms of supporting victims, a major step forward in my priority of supporting victims is the creation of a victims board to oversee both the strategic and operational delivery to victims. The recently established board meets on a monthly basis and is chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable. During Q1, Operation Encompass resulted in 1,142 reports involving 1,578 children. Now this, as you may recall from previous meetings, is the operation that we've introduced in Gwent to enable children who have witnessed domestic abuse for their school to be informed so that extra support can be provided. This operation gives the police and partner organisations the opportunity to support these children, learn more about their experiences and limit the effect of these adverse childhood experiences on the children. This is particularly important where there are repeat victims. Under community cohesion, the needs of children and young people is something close to my heart, and it was with great pride that I attended the Urban Circle Festival in Newport last month. Music was a little loud for my taste, but nevertheless, the young people clearly enjoyed it. During Q1 of this year, I awarded an additional £50,000 to the project to deliver phase 2 of its U-Turn project. This is using the creative arts to tackle multiple social problems affecting vulnerable young people. The Summer Fest event, devised and organised by the young people aged 13 to 25, was a fantastic event, and I must commend the hard work and dedication of the Urban Circle team. Now, the public will always play a crucial role in making Gwent a safe place to live, and I am delighted to say that in the first quarter of the year, 40 new special constables were recruited by Gwent Police. In total, specials contributed 3,242 hours to policing during this quarter. This commitment is something that we should all commend. Under tackling antisocial behaviour, to support problem-orientated policing, or POP, the force has a process map outlining procedures for developing, supporting and reviewing POP plans. This training will enhance POP plans at a neighbourhood level, and there are currently 27 such plans in place across the force. This is making a difference in our communities, and ASB numbers appear to be stabilising. This will help future performance reporting, as we will therefore be able to compare statistics with a more accurate baseline. Finally, on efficient and effective service delivery, I'm introducing a series of deep dives or critical reviews into my monitoring and security arrangements of Gwent Police. These will be either whole police and crime priorities or elements within a priority. I will be selecting the topics about which I feel it would be beneficial to have a greater understanding of performance. This will offer a new and more in-depth level of assurance and understanding of performance, with the first topic due to be rape. Details of the deep dives will, of course, be fed back to you. Now, although 101 contacts are slightly up, abandoned calls have decreased by 8.4% on the previous 2-year average. Finally, on this matter, The temporary Deputy Chief Constable, John Edwards, will speak about staff absence levels today. Now, we have put considerable investment into staff well-being over the last few years, and it is showing signs of improving results. However, I want this to develop over time before having complete confidence that this is a consistent change. So to conclude, Chair, the performance subgroup is meeting after today's panel to discuss the improvements to the relevancy and quality of the information I am receiving from Gwent Police and how this influences the new performance framework. Once this is finalised, it will be presented to you at the December meeting, where we will also be hearing the Chief's precept bid. So, Chair, if there are questions, I will happily take them, or my members of team will take them. All I would request, if you ask questions, is if you can please give me the number of the paragraph from the report that you're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We do have a few councillors that would like to ask questions. One of my first questions is on page 11. The Victims Board you've referred to, who does the Victims Board comprise? What parties are involved in that?
Right, okay. Right. Well, would you mind, because you will actually, the Deputy Chief will be chairing that board, so perhaps you could answer that question.
Yes, Commissioner. Just in response to the Victims Board, I chair the board, have done since I came into force sort of early May. It comprises of the Commissioner's team and senior members of staff across Gwent Police to try to consider and indeed improve our approach to the way in which we give a proper service to the communities of Gwent in terms of the way that we deliver those victim services. So it comprises of Connect Gwent, my senior management team across the local policing areas, and indeed the Commissioner's office to ensure we've got a good cross-section of membership that have a voice in relation to how we better deal with victims in Gwent.
Thank you very much. My other question relates to page 10, 1.4, the Crime Prevention Report. So a review's been undertaken. Is it possible to share that with the panel as information only at all?
Well, I believe that we can. The force have appointed a strategic lead for this purpose. Superintendent Ian Roberts will now be taking this forward. This follows on from a report that my office produced on crime prevention and the need for greater understanding. It needs to be addressed across all areas of our business, and I'm quite see no reason why it can't be provided.
I think the intention is to share the report that comes out of it, but we had no intention of publishing the original report that came with the recommendations within it. But I think that's a conversation whether or not it can be shared just with the panel.
Are you referring to the original report that we made, or the future?
I'm talking about, so there's a review been undertaken, the review report including recommendations has been presented. So I'm asking, is it possible for us to have sight of that for information only, given it relates to a particular priority of the plan? I
beg your pardon. No, that was a report that we provided really for the Chief Constable to enable her to generate some work, which is what's happening. So
sorry, can I? It's okay. So I think the intention is that what was agreed was at the next SPB there would be a response to that report, and it probably is that response that would be most useful to the panel. However, if you would like to see some of the detail of the report, we can look at how that is made available, and so that the key areas are made available to yourselves.
Okay, so if we can take that as a discussion point later then, please. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lisa Winnett.
Thank you. Just some observations. I was quite disappointed on 5.5 to see the Facebook posts have reached only 6,717. As some of you are aware, I run the Ebervac Valley Crime Prevention Panel's Facebook page. And like, for example, our one post on the 9th of September regarding fuel thefts just in our area of Bramona and Blaena, we reached 7,167 people, and we had 997 engagements on that post. and whereas the Facebook page for the Commissioner is a Gwent-wide one, where we are just concentrating on a small proportion of Gwent, I was quite disappointed to see how low the people reached are on the PCC page. I know it goes on further on page 19, saying it has increased by 3%, but then I was quite surprised then on page 19 how low your followers are, and that again is in comparison to what we've got on our local page. You know, I was wondering what work can be done to encourage more people to see what is actually going on at the PCC office. It was surprising. Then on 5.8 estates update, the opportunity to develop a specialist custody provision in Torfaen had been explored. Is this needed because of what we've got at the Ystrad Mynach station? I know, like for example, for our officers up in Blaen y Gwent, it is quite time consuming going down to Ystrad Mynach, and it takes up a lot of their shift by the time they transport. They wait around in custody, then come back. It can sometimes take a whole shift as well. But can you give us some information regarding it, please?
Yes, and it's taking the questions in the order that you asked them. Certainly in terms of our Facebook following and the social media work, I mean, I can't really comment on organisations outside policing, but certainly in terms of within policing, we're at quite a good level. Maybe I could ask Rodriguez, my head of comms, if he could comment further on that.
Yeah, no worries. I made a couple of quick points. The reach one that you were talking about was with the Chief Constable post, was it? The 5.5? Yeah, that was obviously for the. Yeah, obviously that was a very small audience that was aimed at anyway, because the level of officer who could actually apply for that, so we wouldn't expect that to be really high. Overall, I would say our current stats are good for where we're at and where we've begun. The reality is, because we are a corporate account, a lot of our work we're trying to do is make the content, because some of it is dry in terms of the day-to-day office content. So it's working more with some partners like Positive Futures and tying in with Mini Police and things like that, because the reality is we need to get a lot of our reach and growth via piggybacking off other channels and off other people. But I would say where we're at in the kind of growth, that it's about 3 or 4%. I wouldn't expect it to be that much higher than that anyway. In terms of trying to grow that, there's a few things we've been doing. As part of an increased, more holistic approach to engagement, we're out a lot more than we have been in the past. And I think it's in the report. We did 20-something events through the summer, but as part of that, we're signing people up, not only to encouraging people to like and follow us on those channels, but trying to sign them up to our e-bulletin as well. And if anyone here today isn't already signed up for our e-bulletin, please do, because that's weekly information. And again, that's about redirecting people to our channels, where they can also see other information we want to push out. So you might come in because you've looked at the dog. We were out with the dog section on Tuesday. You might come in for that, but whilst you're there, you might see, well, actually, I'm quite interested in, say, the panels. So it's not bouncing people out and keeping them there, and getting people to see more and more content when they're on our channels. So throughout now, when we start doing the precept engagement as well, we will carry on encouraging people to sign up to, say, not just our social media channels, but in particular our e-bulletin, because that's, I say, a weekly news flow of opinions, events, how to get involved. That's it.
In terms of your second point on the estates, yeah, I take your point. Currently, custody is provided at Newport Central Police Station, and then we have the facility at Ystrad Mynach as well. It is something that's under constant review, and certainly as part of the overall estate strategy, we are looking to the future. And the Newport custody unit will have a limited life, and we need to start planning now for where we may locate future provisions. So that's what that's a reference to. You know, it's very much linked into some of the big capital expenditures that we have, such as the new headquarters and then the overall hub and spoke model. But that's the background to that particular point.
Councillor Mann wants to come in with a question.
Sorry, I think there was a query as well. What is a Bridewell suite? And I think some of us were struggling on that one.
If I can answer that then from an operational perspective, a Bridewell is just a large custody suite with probably 40 plus cells. So Bridewell is just another term for custody suite. In terms of our operational requirements for Torvine, we have got a Torvine Operational Requirements Board, which is quite a snappy title. But we are, so that's chaired by the ACC, but it does have a number of components within that, which include custody. And the reason we're exploring custody and the provision of custody across Gwent is because, as you know, obviously Newport is quite an old facility. Ystrad is the other side of the force. So we're looking at all the options available to us to make sure that it's operationally efficient for our staff to obviously arrest people and then bring them into custody and then deal with them. Also, the other facet we have to put into the mix really is the voluntary attendance, and obviously more and more we're using voluntary attendance as a mechanism by which to deal with our suspects. So I think as part of the overarching needs of the Torvine hub, as it were, we are looking and exploring whether a custody facility operationally in Torvine would be the right place. But that by no means means that that's the end of the story. We're looking at the entire provision of custody across Gwent, but also looking at opportunities elsewhere. As you know, Merthyr is only a sort of short distance away, and so collaboration is also one of those areas we're exploring. So it's just a range of options, Councillor, that we're looking at.
Thank you, because, you know, we've got the voluntary surrenders as well. Got to look at the transport network as well. For example, if somebody had to catch a bus to Cwmbran, it's much harder from Blaen y Gwent area to get a bus to Cwmbran than it is for them to get to Newport. But also we need to enable our officers that they're not tied up with the travelling as well. You know, I am thinking of the Blaen y Gwent area regarding this, and ideally we need something fairly close. Like Merthyr, yes, it is a lot quicker for our officers, and they can check in, book out and get back on shift, you know, usually, then it's a lot quicker than if they travel down to Ystrad as well. So you know, it's getting the balance right. Thank you.
If I could, it is very much about balance, absolutely. And of course, these large capital items, considerable amount of expenditure involved. They require detailed planning and business cases. But you're absolutely right. Officers, we don't want them spending whole shifts just transporting and then looking after someone who's been taken into custody. So we do acknowledge that.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I believe you wanted to finalise that point.
Yeah, thanks for your report, Commissioner. Very comprehensive as usual. There were just a couple of points. I think the Victims Board is very welcome. Victims have come up at quite a few occasions in the time that I remember being involved with, with the police panel and previously, and the more work that can be done, the better, I think. Again, I think the youth project that you mentioned is very welcome, and I imagine the fact you could find some money for it is being very welcome by them as well. I think the new specials is good news, because I think it's probably difficult for a lot of us to understand why people go out and do these very onerous duties literally on a voluntary basis, and I think we should admire people who actually do that. There was one point on the provision diversion schemes, which I think will be taken up a bit later on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby, did you still want to pick up a question, or has it been answered? Okay, thank you. And Peter Nettle.
Actually, Chair asked the original question on the Victims Board, but for clarification, are there any lay members on that, say from victim support or citizen advice, who deal with victims and their problems, etc.?
Can I ask Joe Roberts, I think you can provide some more detailed information in terms of membership?
The Victims Board.
Yes.
So at the moment, the Victims Board, so it's the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. Am I speaking into the mic? Sorry. For the Victims Board, we don't have any lay members on the... sorry, we don't have any lay members. Sorry, I was looking for something else. With regards to diversion. No, there aren't any lay members at the moment. However, there will be a survivor engagement role, which will be employed by Gwent Police. That is due to go out to advert, I believe, next Friday. As a point of that, there will be then, obviously, by the nature of the role, that will be engagement. Primarily, in the first instance, will be around violence against women, domestic abuse, and sexual violence. And from that, there is expected to be a survivor expert group. All of that has to be worked through. But I'm sure the Victims Board has the intention of ensuring that there is either representation or there is a way of ensuring that victim survivor voice within the Victims Board, and that would be organised through that role, and it would be developed by that engagement that role undertakes. And I imagine in the future we would look at where there are other areas of vulnerability that could possibly be looked at and develop some really good practice around how we include survivors and victims in the work and ensure that they are properly included where relevant and they are centre. You know, the whole ethos is about having victims at the centre of things, and that's exactly what that means. So we need to ensure that is done absolutely appropriately, it's safely for the people, it's not tick box exercise. So all of that work will happen, and that dedicated role will absolutely be focused on presenting and advising around that. But again, they will take advice from survivors and victims with that experience to be able to properly inform that role. And I think when we look at that role, potentially there is that we should be encouraging people who have that experience to be applying for that role itself. So we have that whole ethos right through.
I'm not sure if it's useful for me to articulate as well. I think it's fair to say that having set the board up, the focus very much in the first throws of the board and the terms of reference as is to try to understand the internal processes and structures that we've got in place in relation to victims and the level of service we're currently giving. And I think what it's identified is there's definite improvements to be made in terms of the way we give a service to victims today. And I think it's about getting our own house in order in the first instance. But I think that terms of reference is definitely a moving feast we can review. But certainly my initial interpretation was that Connect Gwent was that interface between the victim services and back into Gwent Police, but certainly something I could look at in the future as the chair.
Yeah, Councillor.
Yeah, part of the, again, something else that's come up on a number of occasions, one of the causes for dissatisfaction is the lack of feedback to, somebody may well done a very good job, but the victim doesn't know about it. Is this part of the programme of what will be done?
Very much so, Councillor. I think the first thing for me is, applying the victims' code of practice and how we apply that through the organisation, make sure we're getting the victim at the centre of the service, from culturally throughout the organisation, and just making sure that actually we do those things in terms of updating the victim, keeping them informed, putting those checks and balances in place to make sure we right from the beginning, when we start on that victim journey, we've got that initial contract with the victim that gives us an indication of what the victim wants from us, and then ensuring we keep to that contract is what the drive currently is from the board, to make sure we get throughout the organisation a culture of victim at the centre of our service, and that's what I'm driving forward.
That's a very pertinent question, Councillor Mann. Because the issue of feedback to victims is something that I discuss on an ongoing basis with the Chief, because there's no doubt that it impacts upon victim satisfaction figures, and it's very important that we have the best relationship that we can with victims, especially some who are most vulnerable. So it is a matter that's of concern for us, but I believe that the new board will assist in improving the outcomes there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that report, and thank you for members' interest. Moving on to agenda item number 5, Police and Crime Commissioners for Gwent 2020-21. I can't believe we're talking about 2020. It doesn't seem 5 minutes. It's talking about 2000. Budget set in timetable. Thank you.
I wonder if I could just say a few words of introduction to this item, and then what will follow it immediately, agenda item number 6. We're about to come into the formal budget setting round, and then followed with the medium-term financial projections, and my Chief Finance Officer, Darren Garwood, will be presenting that. Let's not forget, however, that the background to our current financial situation is extreme uncertainty. You don't need me to tell you about the what's happening in Westminster and the almost daily changes to priorities and to some of the procedures that fall out of that. I'm spending a lot of my time with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and involved with the work on the comprehensive spending review, which is now likely to be delayed, and it'll be a one-year rollover. We also know that we have at the background the uplift of 20,000 police officers. Whilst that's fine and dandy, and we're very supportive of that increase, at the moment we lack detail. We don't know what our allocations will be. We've said before, in terms of crude arithmetic, it'll be in the order of 200, but that's simply dividing the total 20,000 by our percentage, which is roughly 1% of the England and Wales policing numbers. So there are a lot of caveats that we have to apply to anything that's financial. So it's very much our best estimates based on where we are at now and anticipating that things will continue in that way. But it's important for panel members to bear in mind that things could change significantly with little notice. And with that, if I could hand over to my Chief Finance Officer, Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'll start off, if I may, with the budget setting timetable presented at Agenda Item 5. You've seen this in previous years. It's for consideration and comment, and you'll be pleased to note that this went to the Joint Audit Committee earlier this month, who scrutinised it to gain that assurance of a robust approach to budget setting. You'll notice that the timetable articulates a statutory deadline, so the key one here is around the January meeting to notify the panel of the proposed precept. And as I said, it does really hopefully provide that assurance of the robustness, because one of the Joint Audit Committee's terms of reference is to scrutinise the process for budget setting. And also at the tail end of the timetable, it's the accounting mechanics and gymnastics to get the MTFP into an annual budget for the system. You'll notice that in previous years, we've had enhanced scrutiny of the Chief Constable's bid by the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, and you'll see that table for the end of November. So Gwent Police is busy building up their detailed financial asks to the Commissioner. Then we provide that robust scrutiny, assurance, test, check back before we bring the proposed precept increase to you. All the meetings, save a few, have been scheduled and identified. There's still some unknowns in the timetable, which the Commissioner has already articulated. Timing of the provisional settlement, so the provisional settlement being the point at which the Home Office give us the provisional indications of next year's budget. We're also not quite sure when the final settlement lands, usually in January. And then I need to make some arrangements with the Police and Crime Panel Finance subgroup where we can go through some of the detailed financial elements of the medium-term financial plan. So at that point, I'll pause for any questions before I move on to the medium-term financial plan.
Any questions? Are we happy to move on? Okay, move on. Thank you.
Wonderful. If I move on to the presentation at agenda item, I think it's still 5 or 6, you'll notice that you've had this presentation a number of times in the past, so I won't labour each point independently. However, I will just bring to life a couple of the points. So if we take the first slide, top left-hand corner, we talk about governance. Rodri's already spoken this morning about we've started the communication engagement piece with the public around the precept. So we've had a number of summer engagement events where we're canvassing, almost pulse testing the public around their appetite. Rodri has devised a very detailed engagement plan as we move into the meter budget set between October and January. And you'll recall in previous years, my budget proposal report brings to life the public findings of potential precept increase. If you recall from January's meeting this year, we had an increase of 6.99% on precept, which I'd replicated throughout the MTFP, and we're not proposing at this stage to change that plan that we had at January. subject to some of the points already the Commissioner has already alluded to. You will also be aware, 22-23, we get that crossover point where actual precept forms a larger percentage of the overall budget than government grant. So that's incredibly important around who's the majority shareholder in policing in Gwent. We've noticed previously that sometimes there's a disconnect between what the public require from policing and what the operational side, from a threat, harm and risk perspective, need to invest resources in. And what we've identified through a piece of national work is the more engaged we are with stakeholders, particularly the public, and the more information we can give, the more those two points come closer together, that the policing and the public viewpoints of where we should be investing money come very much closer. And that's become acutely important as we move to that crossover point of funding. Talking about funding, as the Commissioner said, we were hoping for a comprehensive spending review in 2019, which basically sets governmental budgets for 3 to 4 years. With the political sort of gymnastics at Westminster, they've elected to do a 1-year rollover. So although it's called a CSR 2019, it's the CSR, the Comprehensive Spending Review bit, is a bit of a misnomer. It's a 1-year roll budget. The next CSR will probably be 2020. The key thing in that was the announcement of £750 million for the 20,000 extra officers across policing. So if you do some crude mathematics and divide one by t'other, that works out about £32,000 per police officer. But when you think about actually when a police officer at constable rank goes through their spinal points, they end up costing well over £50,000 in gross cost. So that money, just on simple math, doesn't pay for police officers long term. It's only secured for 3 years as well, as part of the deal struck with Treasury. What it also doesn't bring to light is the other consequential costs of employing and recruiting police officers. So the police staff, the ICT, the estate, the fleet provision. So all those costs. So it's one of these things, I suppose, it's a lovely problem to have. Extra money from Home Office, from government to invest in local officers. The first 6,000 of the 20,000 are territorial officers. They are visible, frontline officers. Excellent. You wouldn't complain at that. But when you look at the funding and the financing, there is a tail-end legacy with it. So I just want to sort of give members that point there. And also, you appreciate there's other pressures outside of investing in new officers. So the current establishment will need pay awards, there's inflation, post-Brexit or pre-Brexit world, interest rates, uncertainty of the pound, all those macroeconomic factors that impact on Gwent. So at a simple level, a lot of our ICT licenses are costed in dollars because obviously they're big US corporations that develop these things. So we're seeing cost pressures come through. We also talked, and I think at this point, going back to the Commissioner's report, the estate strategy, picking up on the Torvine Hub, I think it's very apt that at the December meeting of the panel, we bring an update on the estate strategy because it lends very closely to the medium-term financial projections. Because you appreciate the estate strategy only has a finite set of how it's funded. So capital grant off Home Office is our first port of call, but that currently today is 40% of the total it was 5 years ago. So the current capital grant we receive off government barely pays for a third of our fleet replacement programme a year. So I've got to go to other sources of funding to pay for the rest of the fleet programme, estate capital strategy, ICT and other bits and bobs. And that generally comes through either reserves and committed funds, which there's a further slide in the presentation that shows how they've been depleted over a number of years, or through borrowing. So the current medium-term financial projections estimate the best part of sort of £30 million worth of borrowing over the life of the MTFP to fund absolutely required capital programme within Gwent. But again, the December meeting, all this will be far further brought to light to the backdrop of the Chief Constable will bring her bid, like we've done in previous years, where they articulate the operational requirements and I polish it off with the financial ask. We always touch on efficiencies, so moving on to your next slide, top left-hand corner, efficiencies. You'll be aware, you've heard me say many times, we've saved over £49 million worth of cashable savings since 2008 in policing in Gwent. But there's always a moving goalpost. The gap is always increasing because funding cannot always keep a pace of demand-driven expenditure, etc., and national initiatives. So we still have over £5 million worth of savings to make. We have plans for over 4 million. We've got a shortfall of about 700,000 to find with plans to the life of the MTFP. I've talked about the economic impact, the uncertainty of Brexit, the impact on police pensions that had with uncertainty in the markets, devaluation of the pound, interest rates, inflation. So if you think about how exposed we are as an organisation to fluctuations, you can appreciate that I need to keep a close eye on that. Within the comprehensive spending review, aside from the rather large figure of the £750 million for policing, there was additional money into the Crown Prosecution Service and Ministry of Justice to deal with the implications of 20,000 extra police officers in policing. So that was a welcome piece. So we don't just catch the criminals, we've got people who can actually deal with them thereafter. If I move on to the graphs, you've seen these graphs before. The first one shows the crossover between precept and funding, and if you draw a line where the point crosses, you see that's 22-23. The next graph, the red and blue lines, or for those in black and white, the grey and grey lines, you'll notice that provides an analysis that if expenditure had gone unchecked over the period of austerity, there would be a £55 million gap in police finances. But you all acknowledge, looking at the next slide, we've closed £50 million of that gap, so the remaining gap is just over £5 million. And the final graphical display of the line chart just shows that very small gap, which remains after we wind into the equation known efficiency plans at this point in time. So we're not faced with a huge deficit. It's about 700,000 at this point in time. The remaining efficiency savings are going to be difficult to deliver. But what we've done, we've met with a chief officer team and we're having a continuous extensive dialogue around how we be very adaptable and flexible to those efficiency schemes in light of changing funding assumptions. Because you'll acknowledge that the MTFP still assumes a £6 million hit from the funding formula being revised. So I've talked at length in the past about not only has been the policing pie getting smaller, there's the risk of our slice of pie getting smaller. But if that doesn't come to fruition, and I couldn't tell you today whether it will or won't, we need to be very adaptable and flexible around the pressing the button on our efficiency savings. If I just touch on the last two slides then, one just shows the capital programme, and as you can see, the largest majority being estate improvements predominantly around HQ and some of the hub and spoke works. But I suppose the most palpable and powerful slide is the last one that shows how our reserves have been depleting over the next 5 years. So we're running over sort of £50 million of reserves and committed funds, and that's an important rhetoric we use. We only have one reserve really, and that's the Chief Constable's emergency reserve, which is £4 million, and that's designed that way if we have a major incident, a critical incident, we can apply resources in that first 24 hours without worrying about the funding thereof. The remaining 50 million are committed funds to deliver the estate strategy, to deliver the change programme, to underwrite budgetary risk in the programme. So you can see the depletion of reserves down to sort of £6 million, circa £6 million by 23-24. I'll pause that. I appreciate it's a quick run through, far more detailed in December, when hopefully we'll have far more clarity around government funding at that stage. Questions?
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Winnett, I know you wanted to raise a question, followed by Councillor Jordan.
On the medium-term financial projections, the funding source analyst, the graph you've got by you, Darren, on page 29. Right, you say about the 3-year increase now that we're going to be having for extra officers, which we all think is fantastic. We need these extra officers, we really do. Concerns me, where's the funding going to come from after the 3 years? And it does, looking forward. But with this graph, it's not actually, how can you put it, showing that we are going to be having extra funding. And all right, it could be my eyes, the way it's looking on you, but the money we had in 2015-16 was 72.9 million. It was from the Home Office. Yep. We dropped then for several years, and only this year they've brought us back just slightly above what we were having in 2015-16. And it just, to me, doesn't look like it on the graph. It could be my eyes on why we're not showing the trend that we are going to be having extra money for 3 years for these officers. Right, we need more than that, mind you. We know that our baseline, we still need more on that. So it's just some concerns over the graph.
You're absolutely right. At this stage, we don't know our allocation of the £750 million and the allocation of officers. So at the stage this MTFP was done, we could have estimated sort of 200, as the Commissioner has already said, that's 1% of the national. But we don't know the timing or the value of that MTFP, of that amount. What my plan is, the moment we know, I'd engage with the finance subgroup of the panel so I can quickly revise these. So I was in danger of hypothecating a figure that might not necessarily come to fruition. But you're absolutely right, it's a spot on spot.
If I may just quickly add to that, because you raised the issue of the new officers, I think it's worth pointing out that the 20,000 or whatever our share is of that is over and above planned recruitment anyway. So it'll be an overall increase, without doubt. But the very best that we'll achieve is going back to pre-austerity levels. So we need to bear that in mind. It is a 3-year programme, as you say. We understand from Home Office statements that in the first year, the first full year of it, and we're planning to start now in this financial year, but the first full financial year, the next financial year, the money will be focused on neighbourhood policing teams, on police forces, as opposed to the National Crime Agency, for example, and counter-terrorism. But there is no such assurances for years 2 and 3 at this point. So, as I said, the fine detail is important. There will be an increase, but we can't be precise at this point.
It still concerns me where we're going to be in 3 years' time when, that funding stops. It is absolutely fantastic that people are calling for extra police officers, but at the end of the day, the extra funding should be continuous going forward, not just a 3-year programme. Because is that saying then after 3 years we're not going to fund you, the public then are going to have to pay for you, or we're going to have to lay you off?
Yeah, we can't give assurances on any of this at this point. All we can assume is, or trust, that it will be considered as part of the comprehensive spending review when that fully launches, and will be taken into account with the police funding formula calculations going forward from that. But that's the very best assurance we can give it. Well, it's not an assurance, but that's the very best we can say at this point.
Thank you for that explanation. A question raised by one of the members was the fact that in terms of the number of officers, there were 701 staff. And to some members, that seemed particularly high. Is that staff or is that full-time equivalence? It was on the slide on page 27.
That'll be full-time equivalents of staff. What I suggest, if I can bring a breakdown to the next MTFP meeting of this panel that shows where they lay within the infrastructure, because you appreciate that's a 2-to-1 ratio, but you appreciate that enabling the amount of staff we need in that middle office to ensure that frontline officers aren't doing the non-warranted powers piece. So I think what I'll suggest is there's a schedule I can put into the papers that shows that breakdown. And also what could be very useful is we can show officer numbers by areas, well, local authorities. Well, that's a really useful document I can slide in as well. Perhaps I'll even circulate it before the meeting. That'll be an action.
CSOs.
Yeah.
Thank you. And to follow on from that, I'll touch about the day in the life meeting that we had with Gwent Police last week. But one of the things that came up from that meeting was about the amount of service that's lottery funded. We were I think a number of us were actually quite surprised to see how much of it was lottery funded. And I think going forward, when we're having a finance report where we're talking about the precept and making decisions, if we could understand some of those services that are lottery funded, so that, in terms of future-proofing them, that it was quite clear they were very valuable services and they were very proactive services. And I think there's an issue there about understanding, from our point of view as well, how much of that is funded by lottery so that there is no future proofing to it almost. If that grant comes to the end in 2 years, is that something that's going to be at risk?
Yeah, absolutely agree. In the budget report I present each year, there's always a section on our exposure to specific grants, because they are time limited, they're not in the base. So I could add a host of other examples, but the big lottery, the Missing Children's Hub, I worked on that bid 2 years, two iterations of it. So that's been sort of coming up to probably 10 years now. That piece has been in train. But yeah, I'll show the exposure around other Welsh Government funding, other aspects of even Home Office specific grant. Because if you think about the backdrop we've had recently, over recent years, the whole Police Transformation Fund, £175 million that goes nationally across policing, that's a time-limited specific grant. And we in Wales already have a number of projects that are facing what we determine as cliff edge funding. So yes, I'll bring that to life.
Councillor Jordan, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Going back last year on the precept, when it came for the M4 Relief Road, you was putting about £1 million aside, something aside for it. Now it's not going ahead now. Where's that money actually going? And if could it be to maintain the officers after the 3-year period, would that money be able to maintain that?
Well remembered, Jason. Well, no, you're absolutely right. I got questioned on that day because the decision wasn't made, and the answer I gave that day was I could use it 10 times over, but my preference on that day was to offset future borrowing costs, because we knew of the pressure on the capital programme and the £32 million of the borrowing I would have to do. I'd recycle that money back through as a revenue contribution to capital, because it saves me borrowing an extra £1 million at 2.5% interest. But again, we didn't know about the 750 million and the 20,000 new cops at that point. So that's certainly still in that base budget. That money is safe. So if I don't utilise it on offsetting borrowing costs, it will certainly go towards the sustainability and creating that infrastructure to have those 200 extra police officers in Gwent.
I think, if I may, as the question was specifically around the M4 issue, you are right. The black route is not going ahead. It's a bit early to say yet that there therefore won't be any reasonable expenditure associated with the M4, because you'll be aware that the Welsh Government have set up a commission to look at how traffic flowing through that part of the M4 can best be accounted for, and indeed associated things such as other forms of transport, better public transport, more environmentally friendly vehicles, that sort of thing. Gwent Police are going to be part of that commission. We had a discussion with the Deputy First Minister yesterday at the Policing Board, and we may have more information in due course. It is possible that another type of route may be considered. So at this point, we can't say that there won't be expenditure on matters relating to the M4. We can't say that. We do know that the black route, as it was described, is not going ahead, but there could well be others.
Thank you very much. So we've got 3 final questions then. So Councillor Mann, Councillor Eason and Councillor Millard. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. You did touch on it before, Darren. Page 29, I mean, I think it's very significant. It shows that basically over the course of 10 years, the government funding has gone from more than 2/3 of our budget and will go to less. I think the public are getting more aware of that, and quite rightly they'll be asking questions as to where their directly where their money is going, because if it's perceived as government money, people are a bit wrongly in a way a bit concerned, but you know, people are actually digging into their own pockets with this now, aren't they? So that's one. On page 34, I noticed the PFI commitments are disappearing, well, as of 1920. Maybe you could have a word on that. And we keep hearing about these new 20,000 officers. Looking at the wider world at the moment, how assured is it that any of those officers will be coming down the line to Gwent or anywhere else? You know?
Picking up on your first point around the public expectations, I think that's the key piece of engagement and communication that we're going to do throughout the autumn months. If you recall, I think I had 2 clear messages from the panel following the precept meeting this year, and it was around performance of the force and communication. So we've been working stringently with the Chief Officer team around getting that communication message out. I think I've referred to it as mood music in the past, around what Gwent Police are actively doing. I mean, you had the visit to the force last Friday, wasn't it? To see some of the excellent work they're doing, and I think it's about that messaging. So we've been pushing hard between the 2 comms teams around that public engagement, the messaging out, so when they do see their precept increase, they can correlate it with an investment area and an improvement in performance for them. That's our sort of, I suppose, piece on this. If I move to PFI, I briefed previously around the potential for voluntary termination in that. We are in the final throes of negotiations around that piece. So perhaps I can brief the Finance Subcommittee separately around our trajectory on that, but you've noticed the reserve being utilised. And thirdly, the 20,000, the absolutely assurances they will come to Gwent. The piece is, there's a number of different formulas they could do to apportion them. I think it's only going to be, whichever one you use, it's marginal around, is it 200, is it 170, is it a bit more? I think there will be top slicing. So the 20,000, the first 6,000 of that are guaranteed to go to frontline forces, territorial forces. So our 1%, so our first 60, if you will definitely. I think beyond there's an ask around national bodies. The National Crime Agency, Counter-Terrorism, may top slice some of the next 14,000. So we will still hopefully get around 1%, but it might not be a 14,000, might be 1% of 10,000. So we're probably thinking 160, 165, John, around that of that 20,000. But I'm absolutely sure there will be more in Gwent. But we're kind of working on that base figure.
Thanks, Dan. I think when people are asked to pay extra money, one of the best messages really, and it goes down with the panel as well, is that will be translated into people on the front line, that we are getting extra officers from that. It's very difficult for people to see locally, because if you get a few extra hours locally in your particular patch, you're not suddenly going to see 3 officers on the ground where there were 1 or less. And that is the problem, is equating that to the very local. And the sort of comments I get, and I'm sure other members get, is, when did I last see somebody in uniform in the village, sort of thing. And that is what you're up against, really.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's linked to the questions of Councillor Winton and Councillor Mann, and also the fact that you've suddenly come from maybe 200 officers down to maybe 160 officers. But what I've seen over the last 10 years is the austerity programme took a big swipe of our police staff, a lot of experienced police staff, and recently there has been moves to employ more police constables, but we're not employing experience. Now that experience has got to come from within. It's got to be built on. So I think that looking at the possible 32,000 coming to Gwent, maybe make us 160 police, maybe 170, I don't know. But for every time you employ one policeman, there are some retiring. So we lose experience all the time. It'll take, in my mind, maybe 5 to 6 years to really build some strength from this potential, let's call it windfall from government, to get anywhere near where we might have been 10 years ago. I don't particularly believe that we'll see many police on the beat in the next number of years, particularly because you'll be building back experience into what you've got and taking out retirements. This is all going to be built into the programme. So I am sceptical of this money from the government, because all they're doing is filling in the bricks that we've lost in the wall. And experience is the important thing. And I am sceptical of the fact that will it deliver in the short term? No. In the long term, possibly. Thank you.
If I could just respond briefly to that, and with your permission, Chair, I'm quite sure that the Deputy Chief Constable may well want to add a few points. Basically what you're saying, yes, it's fair enough. Numbers is one thing. Experience and skill sets is another. And you're quite right. understandably, most of those who join Gwent Police now are new recruits and so have to go through a period of considerable training, mentoring and learning before they can become fully effective police officers out on the streets. That's absolutely true, and that's true of any profession, I dare say. We also have a number, however, of transferees who will be experienced police officers coming from other forces and transferring into us. So there is an element of balance. But you're quite right, despite all the caveats about not having detailed knowledge of our allocation of the 20,000 over 3 years, we're confident that we will see an increase. The issue of training and qualifications is one that we have anyway, I've mentioned before the new police educational qualifications framework, which I'm doing a fair bit of work on with the College of Policing, is going to be the new requirement. Policing will become a graduate profession, not graduate entryship, I must stress that, but they'll gain the degree during the course of the first few years of their work. So there are lots of things that we have to take account of, basically. The essence is we will see more officers, but you're quite right, it'll take a degree of time for them to become fully effective and knowledgeable officers. That's a fair comment. But with your permission, perhaps the Deputy Chief Constable would like to comment.
I mean, first and foremost, I think I've got 3 points. I think the first two in relation to the last point made, really. I think it's a valid point. We are losing experience through the door, day in, day out. I think the first point to note on that is the new staff coming in are above and beyond what we'd already planned to recruit. So there is additionality there. The extra 160-ish we'll get will be on top of. So, and I think the Commissioner mentioned it earlier, what it'll do is it'll take us from where we were probably pre-austerity in terms of numbers, so it'll take us back up to about 1,500. But nevertheless, it is additionality to what we'd planned in over the forthcoming years. But I think the experience is really, really valid, because we know, because of the numbers we've been bringing through over recent years to get us back up towards that 1,500, it does mean that our response police officers are very young and in service invariably. So I know that Matt Jukes, Chief Constable from South Wales, is the National Police Chiefs Council lead on pay and reform, and I know we're exploring options around how do we retain that experience and encourage people to stay. So there's a whole host of measures that can be used, and I'm sure that we'll have those discussions as time goes on to see if we can retain some of that experience. I think that's something we should rightly look at as well. The second point I want to raise in terms of the overarching issues is around the front line. I think it's something the Commissioner's mentioned before. I think the front line to many is the response police officer, but I think we have to look at the front line being much broader than that. And I know the Commissioner's mentioned to you before and has mentioned at various forums that other issues affecting the communities across Gwent are issues such as cyber or cyber-enabled, cyber-dependent crime. It's also serious organised crime. It's also vulnerability, protecting vulnerable people. All those perhaps are posts that we also need to consider as part of this uplift to make sure that we protect the communities of Gwent in the broadest possible terms and not just look at those numbers as additionality necessarily on in terms of fluorescent jackets, in terms of response police officers. And one thing to give you confidence, we are doing significant amount of work in terms of looking at our operational policing model, using a company called Process Evolution, or a package called Process Evolution, that gives us the detail around and the methodology and the science around the numbers, where we need them and how many numbers we actually need. But that looks at the entire operating base and not just the response function. So I just wanted to make sure that for me, frontline is far broader than perhaps what in general terms people perceive.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to graph 5, which is on page 33, in regards to the capital programme, I've heard a couple of different numbers being bounced around, and I just want to clarify this in regards to the graph that's presented. I've heard 32 million mentioned in regards to, is that the full capital programme? Because the graph illustrates 28.1. And also some of the numbers on the graph illustrating to certain areas. I mean, 4.4 million is certainly larger than 1 million, but according to the graph, it's the smallest section in yellow. So it does the colours obviously all respond to the actual parts? Is the 4.4 actually regarding to the non-capital fund, but it's in the wrong place on the graph, or is it actually the 4.4 referring to the fleet? Some clarity, please.
Yeah, it looks like the £32 million I quote is the borrowing as part of the investment of the whole programme, the 18 million over the years. Because if you do the simple math, you've got £55 million of the reserves. That's not enough to pay for an £80 million programme. 32 million of borrowing. So that's the connection, if that's clear.
It does clear it slightly. So just in my understanding, the colour red illustrated here is fleet, but that is 1 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you take so the fleet. The ICT will be the 0.2 and the non-capital will be the 4.4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Thank you very much, Darren, for your presentation today. Can we just have a final point then?
Yeah,
We'll move on to
it's going back to your comments about the experience and not what. 10% of our staff are PCSOs, which they don't have in England. The PCSOs, to me, are a valuable source of work. Is it possible within the remit to enhance the value of the PCSOs to supplement work that they can't do at the moment, which the police can do?
Do you want to take that point back and consider that as part of a future, your future precept report?
I ought to say they do have them in England, but the numbers are far fewer. And we do benefit being in Wales in that the Welsh Government makes a voluntary contribution of 500 PCS, or they pay for 500 PCSOs across Wales, and our share is 101. And all the indications are that that level of support will continue, but I must stress that it's voluntary and is something that our counterparts in England are very jealous of.
Okay. Thank you very much. We look forward to the future reports, and thank you for your engagement around that topic. Agenda item number 7, the Welsh Language Standards Annual Report. Commissioner?
I'll take that one if that's okay. So this report demonstrates our office's commitment to the Welsh language standards, which were introduced in 2017. The information really is there, but the two things I wanted to draw to your attention were on pages 42 and 43. So first of all, in relation to the post advertised, just clarity that I wanted to provide is that it does state there that 0% of posts are advertised as Welsh desirable. In reality, we were unable to evidence that they were advertised as Welsh desirable because it was on a website, a web page that no longer exists. So we're trying to find a way to demonstrate that that our absolute ethos is that all posts as a minimal are advertised as Welsh desirable. And it would be our intention in future when we advertise to certain posts, particularly ones in relation to answering the phone at the first point of contact, that they would be Welsh essential. So this is something that we'll just going to look at again, see how best to portray that so that we can actually demonstrate that our ethos is that all roles would be Welsh desirable ones. But I think the good news story is in relation to the number of employees who have increased their level of Welsh language skills to a level 1 during the past year. That's training that we've all had, and Gwent police staff and officers have had as well. So I think that's the main story, and we intend to continue that, to maintain at least that level, if not increasing amongst our staff within the office.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mann, any wish to raise a point?
Okay, diolch am y adroddiad, Sian. Eto? I was concerned when I read the 0% on page 42, and you have explained that a little bit, because, and I think the future intention is, you know, is obviously what is needed, and I think we should recognise as a panel the fact that we've gone from 4 to 15 people, you know, with a level 1 ability, because you know there is substantial effort has been made there by the staff and the trainers, I would say. One thing I just wondered, we've lost the person who could who has level 5 skills, and we now have one person who has level 4 skills. Is that adequate for the work that needs doing in the office, that somebody has a level 4 skill?
In reality, the individuals that are involved aren't actually doing the roles that require the higher level of Welsh. So both the one that's left and the one that has come in aren't doing those potentially Welsh essential roles. So we are looking at alternative ways to make sure that anybody calling in or contacting us within the organisation have ways to get immediate answers in the Welsh language. We had a discussion yesterday at the All Wales Policing Group about how we, both as Commissioners' offices and as police forces, can share perhaps the expertise within some of perhaps North Wales and Dyfed Powys as well. But as far as our intention would be, as far as the initial contact into the Commissioner's office, we would look at upskilling those individuals that answer the phone in the first instance, to be able to at least have an initial conversation in the Welsh language.
Any further questions on the report? Councillor Eaton?
Yeah, just one, doing just Cymraeg. Just one question regarding the opportunities for staff to learn Welsh language. It says in here that in the last year none have been taken on actively on a course. Do you really give them the opportunity to do it in their time of employment? Because that I see is a problem that I see with Monmouthshire County Council as well, where staff do have a problem being able to attend all these courses, and I think it's quite valuable for them to continue what they're doing if they start.
Yes, I can absolutely confirm, and we've got a real ethos of learning development within our office, and there's encouragement for people to take on the course. What's happened in reality is that a number of people in the past have taken on the basic sort of Welsh language training, and what they're really asking for and looking for is a Welsh language course that relates to their role in work, which I think is a bit of a gap, and is something that I've been having discussions with providers about how we can increase the level of training that isn't just like doing perhaps leading up to a GCSE level, that actually gives people real practical Welsh language skills that they can use in work immediately. Because actually some people have done it at school, for example, but aren't confident enough, but what they're actually looking for is particularly work-related Welsh language training. And that's something that I would actually ask if anybody, any of the local authorities are doing something similar, we'd look to work together on that, but it is something I'm trying to explore.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then, agenda item 8 is information only. So moving on to agenda item 9, your absence management presentation.
Good morning. I believe you've had a previous presentation on well-being, so it's not my intent to revisit the material I've already been privy to. I think today for me is outlining the way that as a force we're looking at absence management, and to demonstrate perhaps a little bit like what the Commissioner mentioned earlier, the progress we're making, but I think there's still a lot of work to do. So hopefully, I'm not sure if you've had the presentation before. In advance, yeah. So hopefully I'll be able to flick through the slides and perhaps get some questions going at the end. So if we start going through. In terms of ongoing media coverage, if I start from the top left, the Chief obviously has been out quite actively in relation to the manner in which our staff, day in or week in, week out, there's almost not a week or weekend certainly that goes by that as a management team we don't get some reports that our officers quite often suffer quite significant injuries during the course of their duties. That's something we're seeing more now than I think we've ever before, and I think it's something we certainly as an organisation, as a force, have got to take real and positive steps towards. And I'll talk perhaps a little bit later in terms of how we're going to do that. One of the things I think we've experienced, and I think the media picked up on before, is around the South Wales and Gwent are probably the highest, had some of the highest levels of sickness across the whole country. And I'll provide some figures later on that demonstrate how we sit alongside some of our most similar forces across the country. And I think that's where I would articulate we do need to do more work. We are making progress, and the Commissioner's already mentioned that earlier, but there is still work to do. I think the bottom left picture is just another cutting really where post-traumatic stress disorder, stress, anxiety, you'll see a little bit later on, or you have seen in the presentation slides, there is a significant issue for here in Gwent. And when you look at some of those figures, it's something you've got to bear in mind. That's why I think the well-being agenda, as a preventative agenda, is so important in trying to support officers and try to make sure that those issues that perhaps lead towards post-traumatic stress disorder are dealt with early, so we can start giving that counselling as soon as we recognise an officer's been through or a staff member's been through a traumatic event. And of course, I think the reality is one of the things for us in terms of the way we manage this, it's some of the cultural issues. So very often, I think sickness is perhaps to a certain degree sometimes masked as well. You know, that officers are taking leave, taking rest days, perhaps not reporting sick on occasion because they feel it's not the right thing to do. I think that for me is a negative part. I think we've got to that's not something we've got to dissuade our staff from doing. It is about being and have an accurate picture of what the true sickness levels are across the organisation, and so that we understand the levels that we've got across the organisation. And as I say, assaults on police, just to finish off on this slide, we're projecting a 30% increase in terms of officers assaulted on duty. And now we are looking at what we can do to support our officers in terms of giving them the tools to try to protect themselves and the public and the communities across Gwent. But it is really concerning. And there's something we're looking at. So we've already, I'm sure you'll be aware, I've taken we're looking to take the uplift of taser-trained officers from 20% to 36%. And I know the Chief's looking again as part of the national work that's going on around officer safety, because we're not unique in Gwent. This is something that's going on across the country. Day in, day out, officers are getting assaulted. And I think there's a massive push nationally from the National Police Chiefs Council to look at ways in which we can protect our staff to make sure that they can carry on doing the job they're paid to do. So I think those are the sort of headlines really in that slide. Moving on, I think this really for me is just a very quick sort of synopsis of where we sit. We have improved. You can see at the top there the Gwent have improved from a position of 3.7% to 2.6%. It's always pleasing to see that we're ahead of South Wales, which is a positive. But that said, when we look at the other forces underneath us there, Northumbria, Durham, Humberside, Northampton and South Yorkshire, many of which are of a similar size to us. And it's in some regards a similar makeup in terms of the communities we serve and sort of get our staff from. They're much lower in terms of the overall percentage than we are. So I think that just demonstrates that we're not massive out there when you look at other public sector bodies, but in terms of policing, we are still a little bit higher than we should be and comparable with other forces across the country. But that is what I want to do there in terms of the reason it's indicated numbers on long-term sick as the 31st of March. The reason I want to raise that is because it's only a snapshot in time, and so it would only be literally on that day. So it will fluctuate. This is an interesting one, I think, and for me, it's really articulates the position in relation to police officers. And I think the top table, I think the perception is that there's perhaps stress and anxiety would be the top two. Actually, it's vomiting and diarrhea and influenza, those common illnesses that affect all of us, are the most, I've got the greatest number of frequency. But then you look at 3, 4 and 5, all those are the issues now that really are impacting on those staff numbers. And when you look then at the number of duty days, I've done some basic maths, so I'm hoping my maths is correct, otherwise my calculator is going to be totally wrong. But we've lost about 4,000 lost days according to my calculations, 4,000 lost days a year in Gwent from stress and anxiety. Now, if you do a very quick calculation of 240 days per year per officer, means on average we're losing the equivalent of 17 officers per annum to stress and anxiety. That's just officers, and I'll talk about police staff later. And whilst obviously the back condition, which is historically something that we were always, obviously saw in our sickness figures, but even that is probably 4 days. But in terms of the overarching numbers, you can see now that our mental health type related illnesses are really having a huge impact on our availability of our officers and the well-being of our officers across Gwent. So overall, just those top 5 I've calculated, it equates to a roughly 24 officers per year, which is about 2% of our overall capacity. In a similar vein, again, going through, you can see the top figure, very similar in terms of the reasons and as to why people are going sick. But again, what we've got here is, again, a similar position. Police staff are also suffering, so it's not unique to officers. We're also getting the same level of absence in terms of our police staff. So stress, anxiety, and obviously the musculoskeletal is still one of those issues that we need to resolve. And 10 staff working days a year, or 10 staff a year, are lost to those sort of top few reasons for not being able to come to work. And that's, all told, this means that we're losing in the region of 27 staff a year, police officers and police staff, to stress and anxiety. Significant issue that we are, and I'll go into a little bit later what we're doing about that. And it is about, putting those measures in place. But I think it is quite a stark reminder that that's having an impact on our staff day in, day out. Moving forward to, again, this is just a snapshot really of how the top 5 officers, number 1 would probably stand out in terms of that's on average nearly 7 months work lost through 8 absences. That's a lot, obviously a lot of time away from the workplace. And similarly, the police staff below, that accounts for, again, about 3.5 months of work lost due to 6 absences. So you can see there's quite a lot of a small number of officers taking quite a bit of sickness, which accounts for the overall total. Moving on to the gender, I don't want to dwell too much on this particular one because I have some other stats which I haven't put into the figures, but there is a slight disparity. I don't think it's enormous between the gender in terms of sickness absence, with a slight lower amount of absence into percentage-wise than from male officers as opposed to female staff. But I don't think it's anything significant. It's just something that we have noticed. There's a slight issue, and I think for me, it's just unpicking what's behind that, what the reasons are, and is it an issue around stress and anxiety again, and why is it perhaps affecting our female colleagues more than it's affecting our male colleagues. So it's unpicking that, and I think that for me is what this data does. It asks more questions of me, and that's my job, I think, to then unpick that through the performance framework. But certainly some of the other things that came out, we did, that aren't on the slides, but have come out in terms of a dip sample we conducted in August 2018. The highest percentage of sickness that we've experienced in Gwent was for P, C and DS. 75% of the sergeants that were off sick in the month of August 2018 were sick for long term. 39% of the scale 2 to 6 absences were down to the force, obviously the first point of contact, the force control room, and they were because of short-term absences, because there's quite a lot of police staff in there. But it is, again, something that this data is flagging up, that we've got pockets perhaps where we need to take a sort of deeper dive in that area and make sure we understand the rationale and put those support mechanisms in place to try to help and support those staff not reporting ill if possible.
Just asked on that point, have you worked out the percentage of how much is work-related stress and how much is home life stress as well? Because, the way it's coming across, that it's all, when you say stress on there, it's all to do with work, but some of it could be home-related stress as well?
That's a very good point, I think, Councillor. I think I haven't got those figures today, but I think that is the point that I'd be, for the next People and Diversity Board, next deep dive, we look into this. For me, it is about unpicking what are the reasons. So, because sometimes it's just reported as stress, and it's through those conversations that you understand, is it personal stress? So have they got issues issues at home or with other aspects of their life that perhaps are just spilling into work? And it's just understanding the reasons. So I haven't got the answer today, but I think it's a valid point that we are looking into and making sure that it isn't portraying that Gwent is not a healthy place to work. It's understanding and picking that data to understand, what's happening, but it does still mean whether it's obviously work or personal that they're not still attending, and therefore, we need to try to support them in whatever way we can, whether that be through welfare or through other support, that we can get them back into the workplace. But it's a good point. Moving on to the next slide, this is quite a high-level slide. We talked about earlier about establishment, and this just represents really the proportion of overall numbers of staff going, report the number of days sick. I don't want to go into lots of detail because this breaks it down, but it does demonstrate that it does affect quite large portions of our of the organisation. So it does affect all our operational bases. It does. That's not 49% of staff go sick, but it does mean that of the days lost, it equates to roughly that number of staff. This is an average number of absences per day. I think overall we are seeing a slight decrease, as the Commissioner mentioned earlier in his report. I think if you look, if there were trend lines associated there, it would be quite a level trend line associated going across there in terms of the average absence per day for the force overview. What we are seeing positively is the officer trend line coming down, particularly over the last few months. But again, it is an unstable position, and I think what we need to do is, even though we are making slight inroads, we need to have a bigger impact in terms of the overall numbers.
Sorry, can I step in a second? On the overall view of the officer's absence by day, does that take into account any holiday? Yeah, on the overforce view of the average absence per day, does that count that as well for holidays as well, or is that just only for sickness? Just for sickness.
So but it does give you a perspective, and when you add on top of this, I'll talk a little bit later about restricted duties, whereby when the number of available officers then is impacted in terms of the overall number that are not fit for full operational duties, because when you add those on restricted duties, or just the duties we obviously call it here in Gwent, on top of the sickness, then it does impact on your available resources in terms of frontline duties. So it's just I think that is literally just about sickness absence. It's not including annual leave, re-rostered rest days or anything like that. So it does give you paint a picture really of how on a daily basis we do see a reduction in the deployable resources across Gwent. I have to confess there's a wrong figure here, because for those mathematicians in the room, when I went back to my team and said, well, 10 and 16 doesn't make 34 in my eyes, but
that's because you're an accountant.
Apparently. But yeah, so unfortunately that is an error. They've obviously the auto sum hasn't worked there. So it is 27,000, not 34,000. But so it has gone up a bit in 2017. But as the Commissioner mentioned earlier, it has meant we've had a reduction in 2018-19. But let me be clear. I think we've definitely got more progress to make. And again, this gives you a sort of overview of the average absence by day per force, a sort of health one here as well. I think it's worth noting, and I know you'll probably be aware, but in this year we've introduced a new system for recording our HR data and sickness data and the different ways of recording. So the levels look like they've significantly dropped. What I'd want to be able to do is to monitor that over a longer period, and I think the Commissioner did say this in his initial report, because I'd want to see it in the new system with the new processes for a longer period to make sure that this isn't a more of a system issue rather than it being an actual process issue, if that makes sense. So, you know, it does look good on paper, and I'm not going to, and it does look as if we're making significant progress. But what I want to reassure members is that, look, this is as is. We have introduced a new system, but we will be, through the performance management framework that I'm putting in place, we will be able to track this longer term and have consistency of data sets over a longer period. That'll give me more confidence that this is a true reduction in sickness levels and not merely associated with a change in system.
John, could I ask, what is the average number of absences per day?
So 75 of them in August, it was 75 is the average. So if you saw the previous slide, so the previous two slides, it was 89. We're reducing now to we've reduced to 75. Is what we're saying there.
So through August then, the total number of
the average absence per day.
The individuals that were absent, or
the number of days that if an individual is absent on that day, it is recorded as somebody not in the workplace.
Okay, so in August then, that 75 is on average. You lost 75 people every day.
Across the month, yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
That's my understanding as well. We can clarify it future, but
okay.
Because if you look at the previous two slides, it was saying that's the absence per day. Otherwise, that would be very low. If we only have 75 days in the whole month of August, that would be extremely low.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to clarify.
No, it's per day. So if you
every day. Right.
Yes. So if I said earlier, when we look at it, we have got a lot of people. When you add police officers and police staff, you add the long-term absences, and then you add the short-term absences. 75, you're right, is
75,
yes,
not
missing from the workplace that day based on sickness. Is that
that clarifies it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Slide 12 talks about the occupational health unit referrals. There's a slight downward trend, but that's something I'm pushing as part of the health and safety scrutiny board that I chair. I think for me, it's about an opportunity to intervene early. If you refer into the occupational health unit, then we get an opportunity to start those staff members on a plan to help them back into work, help understand the nature of their illness and what we can do to support them. So I think that's where we need to start to improve. But we did have a total of 3,443 occupational health and counselling appointments in 2018-19, which included 702 management referrals, 168 visual screenings, 104 counselling sessions, 264 recruitment medicals, and 41 driver medicals. So the occupational health unit is being kept busy. I just think that, for me, occupational health is one of those areas where if we get the officers through and staff through quickly, it gives us that early opportunity to intervene and support those staff as best we can back in the workplace.
Could I ask one? Do you get people sort of waiting for maybe non-urgent operations who are not in work? There was an issue in the fire service some years ago where they looked at, speeding up treatment within the health service to get people back into work in that way.
Councillor, we have got that opportunity. We do it. That's not good English, I'm sure. But we do undertake those offers, and we have recently done it where we've been able to get an officer who was injured during an event to get the MRI scan done quickly. So we'll pay for that MRI scan. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the injury, depends on the length of recovery, depends on the waiting list in the NHS, and we've got to balance it all up in terms of value for money, because obviously it's public money that we'll be investing in order to get that person back in. So we do have a process, and we do employ it certainly for on occasion for officers to try to improve and expedite their return to work.
It's a form of investor saving, isn't it?
Yes. But it is about picking the right cases, because otherwise we'd be ending up spending a hell of a lot of taxpayers' money on which is theoretically what and the health service could be support. Yes, so it's getting balanced right. moving through, just in terms of the governance, I think I'm going to touch on this. This is how we manage absence management through the line management structures within and the governance arrangements within Gwent Police. And it goes through to, and it's there to see, I think it's important to emphasise the part that the Commissioner's team as a whole plays in this, in that I chair the DCC's People and Diversity Board, which is attended by the Commissioner's Office. I also chair the Health and Safety Scrutiny Board, again attended by the Commissioner's Office, as is the Scrutiny Executive Board, and then obviously I report into, or the Chief reports into the Scrutiny Performance Board. But throughout this process, from well-being and above really, the Commissioner's team do play a part in holding us to account and making sure that we're putting the right measures in place and scrutinising sickness absence to make sure that we are performing, as it were. So that, I think that's the interesting part of the governance, is that there is checks and balances in place to make sure the force are focusing very hard on sickness absence management. Moving on to this is quite a, I can't even read it myself, and I'm on the screen. So this is quite. So this is quite a. Yeah. I think I need binoculars rather than glasses, but this is. I suppose what this is getting to.
Expand on the screen.
No, I've got some slides. I was sorry, I was jesting. But I think the reality is what this is demonstrating is that there is a people plan in place. We are in the process of finalising the next iteration of that, and this will be actually supporting the way that we deliver absence management across Gwent. So by way of an example, I suppose, so we've revised our attendance procedures and training. So we've launched a revised attendance procedure. Sessions have been rolled out to all supervisors within force to raise awareness and provide them with the confidence to deal with absence management in a robust, fair and consistent way. And these are running alongside the communication plan in terms of making sure we do those returns to works, we do those visits whereby we do those contacts so we understand what's happening with the individual, how we can support them back in the workplace. And I think that's vital. In terms of data, we are looking at, I've mentioned earlier, the absence compliance data is shared with departmental leads on a fortnightly basis to identify trends and areas of disproportionality. So how are we doing as a whole across our local areas and across our units? And I think that will link back probably, I'm not sure if to another agenda item where we talk about performance, but I'm leading on the performance management framework for Gwent Police. And one of the things that I've focused my efforts on is getting the performance management structure and framework that actually spans the entire organisation. This isn't just about operational policing, it's the way we deliver business across the communities of Gwent and how we use that framework, that data, to actually inform and evidence our decision making. So for me, the other thing around it, we've launched deep dives into specific areas such as things like anxiety and stress. And we've delivered, for example, I mentioned earlier, the first point of contact, the force control room, where we've now got a dedicated HR officer in the force control suite to make sure that those issues where we do see a significant increase in, or where we could see a significant increase in absences, that we've got that HR support in there to support the managers to encourage and support those staff back in the workplace. What else are we doing? We're doing an annual assessment of officers on adjusted duties. So I mentioned earlier adjusted duties. Certainly in my last force there was a significant issue. Quite a lot of officers across the organisation and staff as well, or certainly with officers, where they're not able to carry out the full range of duties of a constable, then we have to look either temporarily or on a long-term basis. We have to look at the duties for them, and it's just making sure that the adjusted duties mirrors their own medical requirements, really, and that if things have changed and if they can come back to full operational duties, we should make sure that they do so at the first opportunity. But moreover, that we find roles within the organisation, even if they are adjusted, that actually help support the front line in whatever way we can. So it's maximising all the staff we've got back in the workplace. I think in terms of We've also conducted a review of, I've talked earlier about occupational health. We've now appointed a clinical lead in occupational health and an occupational health manager to provide clinical governance. We're using case conferences to make sure that we understand the nature of the absence and how we can support them back in the workplace. And that could be in a range of measures. And it's making sure we have those occupational health get involved in monthly sickness Skype meetings with LPAs and departments to make sure that when you look at the broad breadth of absence we've got across our areas, that they're actually actively seeking the support of occupational health to support those staff back into workplace. And the other thing I think that you might be aware of is obviously what we frequently get is people not attending occupational health, so they'll make an appointment and then not attend. Now, obviously, that like any other medical environment, if you take somebody's slot and they can't get themselves, you could be depriving somebody else of being able to get the support that our occupational health would offer. So it's about making sure that if you have booked an appointment, you should make your very, very best to attend and maximise those appointments and the facilities we've got on offer. I mentioned earlier the impact of mental health. I don't want to go through all these. I think there's a lot of work being done in terms of supporting our officers in terms of their psychological well-being, making sure that where we can reduce and intervene early in terms of specific if there's a traumatic incident. That's why the TRIM training, the TRIM process is there, trying to intervene early, trying to understand and trying to get officers to talk about the trauma they'll have faced as part of some of their duties. So intervening early is the order of the day. And I'm guessing you will have had some of these issues from your wellbeing presentation before. So I don't want to revisit that, and I know the time is marching on. So I think it's just to revisit some of those areas. So just to bring it to a close, really, I think I've definitely gone over my 12 minutes. So I apologise, Chair, for that.
You've still beaten Darren's time.
Okay. Okay. So in sum, there's a significant driver. We're working hard to improve our health and well-being of our staff through effective absence management. I think the overall the picture is improving, but I have said as well I want to make sure that we continue to monitor that to make sure that it's actual improvement, not just a systems issue. I think that's important, but it is about focusing the mind on providing the support and the measures that to maximise the staff into the workplace. Obviously, I've said it 17 times, stress and anxiety has become a significant issue, not just for us here in Gwent, but across policing. And mental health of our staff is a priority, and I think the well-being agenda has certainly looked to prioritize that as an issue for us. I mentioned the monitoring performance and the performance management framework, and I think the governance processes that I've outlined there, one of the things I have said internally as well is alongside our governance arrangements and the meeting formats we've got, what I want to make sure is that the new performance management framework, when we embed it, actually delivers that opportunity within the meetings to focus on performance day in, and month in, month out, to make sure we keep on top of the issues, including absence management, but the wider issues of performance in Gwent Police. So that's it, and thanks. Any questions?
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's really put absence, particularly through the year, in context and provide some valuable information in terms of absence within Gwent Police. Are there any questions from the floor, please? Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you. Just two questions. One was about the work-related sickness, which you mentioned, but within work-related sickness, there are incidents and serious incidents. Do you have a high incidence of and how you deal with the traumatic effects of police officers going to accidents, for example? How do you deal with those, and do they outweigh the actual figures, or are they just normal within the scope of your analysis? And the other question is, how do you compare the police force, health service, fire service, local authority, for example, in terms of sickness? Are they comparable, or I'll just leave it like that. Are they comparable?
If I answer your first question first, Councillor, I think what I mentioned earlier, in terms, of course, our staff go to not just road traffic accidents, road traffic collisions, I should say, day in, day out, and some of the sites they will see are truly horrific. But the reality is that we offer those officers TRIM training, so trauma trauma input, to make sure that actually the enormity and the gravity of what they've seen, that they're able to speak about it. And we obviously, alongside that, will be counselling. In terms of data, I can provide further data to you at a later stage, but I don't have the actual numbers and how it breaks down in terms of those work-related stress and anxiety issues.
Because they may take months to come out.
Yeah, and that's why I think I mentioned earlier the post-traumatic stress disorder. If we can intervene early, if we give the right support, and that for me, that's where it is about ensuring we do effectively use the TRIM process, so that we do have that debrief of what's happened, and making sure that we do understand what the nature of how the officer's feeling. And then you are right, very often these things don't manifest themselves overnight. They take months, but I think it is about doing that initial intervention early, giving that support early, and then making sure that at pinch points throughout that time that we liaise with that officer and make sure they are dealing with the issues. The second point, I think I've got some comparators in here. Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think we often look at ourselves only as ourselves, and I think I articulated earlier that in other areas I'm sure we do compare favourably. I have got some figures which I didn't bring up here because I wasn't sure on the veracity, because I've been providing them as part of our team. I wanted to make sure that they were sort of audible, but these go back to 2017. So comparing our performance with other sectors, the data I've been given that of the Office of National Statistics in 2017 showed public sector employees took an average of 4.1 absence days per year compared to 7.2 in 1993. Now we are obviously at the 3. I can't remember what it was, 3.2, 3.4. So we are slightly below the public sector average, but again that goes back to 2017. And if we look at where we were in 2017, then we were just 3.6, I think, then. Yeah, so we are slightly under. I think it's a good point. I think the private sector, if we compare to the private sector, they were definitely higher. I think in other public sector, it's about 2.6. So we're not a million miles off in broad terms around other public sectors. I think we could probably get some data around other local authorities and public bodies in Gwent that we could probably compare for future reference, if that would be useful, Councillor.
Okay. Councillor Mann and then Mr. Unford.
Okay. Sorry, thanks, John. There are various theories as to why the public and private sector are different, and the one is how well people are looked after, but we better not go into that one. But what I wondered was, you mentioned the different ways of treating people in the emergency services. Obviously, police, fire, ambulance, if you think of a road traffic accident, they're all going and experiencing the same pretty horrible circumstances. Do you share maybe learning from the ways of treating people and getting them over this? Is there any sort of joint working on how to get people to recover from, various sort of situations?
The short answer to that is I don't know, because I'd have to check back with our occupational health to ascertain if there is learning. I'm sure there would be, but I think that would be just my assumption rather than giving you the appropriate answer. I think it would be probably easier if I came back to you with a response over the next few days, so that I can ask our occupational health. But it's certainly one of the things we are looking at, which I didn't mention. We have been looking at opportunities of sharing occupational health facilities with the fire and rescue and other public sector bodies to see if there was an opportunity there. But if I can come back to you, Councillor, that would be useful.
Yeah, one thing the public sector seems to be pretty poor at quite often, public sector generally, is sharing good practice. Yeah.
I mean, operationally, we would. So, for example, there's often, so I've carried a number of multi-agency, large-scale operations, and there we do have a formal debrief process and a lessons learned process, which is fed back in, because I think then it is about how do we learn lessons from the way our command and control system, command and control of that incident work, etc. In this sort of sense, I'd have to check with occupational health.
Okay, thank you.
It was just a, you talked about averages, etc., and you're looking at other organisations, emergency services, yeah, but I don't see the relevance of private sector or council workers. They're not under the same stress levels, handling bodies or fires, etc.
Yes, that's the point well made. I think I was just, ultimately we can look as well at fire and rescue services, Welsh ambulance service, etc. But I think sometimes it is a useful comparator to understand where we sit in general terms. Yes, we're a different role, but that wouldn't answer some of the police staff absence rates because they don't have those pressures. So I think, in broad terms, I think I'd be interested in seeing a broad spectrum of absence management, because then I'd be able to compare it with similar sort of roles in the police staff grade. So it's not just about police officers. For me, it's about police staff as well, and making sure we because we have got nearly, you said earlier, nearly 800 police staff and 700 full-time equivalents. And it's about, and you will look at the sickness absence of those as well. It's still, those staff is still quite high, and there's still quite a high proportion of stress and anxiety, and it could be argued they don't necessarily see the same issues and have the same pressures. So I'd be interested in understanding the broader picture, but I do take your point.
Well, thank you, John. I think you've provided us with a lot of information there. It's been very helpful and very useful. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next item then, number 10, the Forward Work Programme. Kath?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring members' attention to the next meeting of the panel is planned for the 13th of December 2019. We have a number of items already planned in the work programme. You see the first two items are the Treasury Management Strategy 2020-21, Treasury Management's 6-month update report 2019-20, both for information. We have the Performance Monitoring Report, the PCC update report as usual, and the initial budget briefing. I've also, based on the discussion now, it's suggested we add on the update on the estate strategy if members are minded to add that on.
Move that.
Well, I think it's fair to say as soon as we have clarity, we will bring it to the most appropriate meeting. Who knows?
Just checking in relation to the Strategic Equality Annual Report, whether you'd like to bring it to December or circulate it outside of the meeting. It was originally on the agenda for this meeting. Okay.
Okay, that's all the items on the agenda. I would like to pass on our thanks, if we could, to Nigel Stevens and the staff at Gwent Police for the interesting day that a number of the members had last week. The way in which it was organised, going from the Missing Children's Hub team all the way through to serious organised crime. I did feel quite sorry for Ian Roberts, who'd had his photograph stolen, his story stolen by the time he came to tell us his presentation. However, as we were running over time, it meant he could condense it from 30 minutes into about 10. So, but it was a really informative day, and if you could just pass our thanks back to those officers involved in making that presentation and making themselves available for questions as well. That it was extremely useful. They did mention they would share the slides though, so if somebody could arrange for the slides to be shared, that would be great. And I think the point that came from that was about the network and the engagement that's needed within local authorities. So when we're talking about things like the Missing Children's team, when we're talking about the networks and the resources, they talked about a particularly effective day where they were engaging in Ringland, and how they were trying to bring the community together, and how they were trying to work and obviously gain intelligence, but also work with that community to see how they can develop. And it was engaging with people like Positive Futures, it was engaging with local authorities, and I think it made it clear to the members that were represented there that it's taking that information back, it's working and making sure that where these opportunities come up, that we make ourselves available and try and engage as best as we can. Because it sounded like there's some really good work going on, particularly within that area that they're taking forward, which local authorities, the social workers, the EWOs can all be working with. So yes, thank you very much. That was a really interesting day.
One thing also was the missing children that Superintendent Roberts mentioned, how he illustrated the absence from schools and how they fitted into hotspots of illegal activities. I thought it was very, very informative, because there are lots of children going missing every day, every week, every month, and I thought that was quite illustrative.
It may be helpful, Chair, for that very point, together with other issues affecting children and young people, was the core subject of the Welsh Government Policing Board yesterday. And arising from that, both the Deputy First Minister, Jane Hutt, and the Deputy Minister, Julie Morgan, were very keen to learn more about the impact of serious and organised crime as well on children, with things like county lines getting drawn into it, and how through partnership working on a strategic level we can improve matters greatly within Wales. So it's a highly pertinent matter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you all for your attendance today. The next meeting, as Kath said, is the 13th of December. Thank you all for your attendance and interest. The meeting is now closed. Diolch yn fawr.